I am fascinated by a movement that is referred to as often the land back movement, or the whole movement to really, in essence, try to somehow change perceived past injustices and to correct them by giving back the land. Like in common parlance today, we have a lot of, quote, Aboriginal land acknowledgements. They come in different forms. But where did this land back movement really come from, in your view, Brian? I mean, you've been watching this very closely for years. Help us understand what's going on here.
Well, I don't claim to have a complete understanding of this, but I think that land back is just sort of the natural culmination of this nation to nation campaign that the chiefs have been on now for many years. What the chiefs have done, and I'm generalizing here, but basically it's using litigation and activism and naive politicians and judges, if I can be as offensive to say that, to further their nation-to-nation campaign and the land back idea, and the idea that the land we are presently on is stolen land, and all of those phrases comes from that. Now, you mentioned, and I'm going to take us back to 1969 for just a second here, because you mentioned the Indigenous leaders who were arguing, making my argument, and there were many. Watney and Ruffled Feathers was the most famous.
Indeed.
And he was the chief opponent of Harold Cardinal, who was advocating for the separate, separate but equal, a nation-to-nation type of thing. So those wise Indian leaders saw what was happening, and they said, no, Indians can celebrate their culture at the same time as being Canadians, as being ordinary Canadians, and we should have listened to them, David, and we didn't. Instead, Pierre Trudeau and John Chrétien caved into the pressure from the chiefs, and ever since then, we've been going in this nation-to-nation direction, and the Supreme Court is leading the charge. And what I'm thinking, David, is that Canadians do not like where we're going, and I think you're going to find that out now in BC.
I think you're right, Brian, and quite frankly, I think a lot of Canadians probably are not even aware that this kind of pathway has been unfolding the last several decades. Why should we as Canadians care about this issue?
Well, because you think you own a house, David. You think you own a house and land. Maybe you don't. Perhaps your land is going to be under a claim of one particular group who said, well, that's our traditional land, that's our traditional territory. And in British Columbia, as in all Canada, there are overlapping traditional territories. And you're sort of asking yourself, what does my ownership mean? And I think there are going to be many people that are in that category. So it matters tremendously. Do we live in a country where we can own property, or are we just sharing our land ownership with somebody? Do we live on stolen land, as some of them complain, etc.? So this is completely uncharted territory.
Wow. So this is very profound issue. So if you even own your property, somebody could say, well, no, historically that's somehow our, quote, traditional land, and we make a claim. Therefore, you should be paying some extra tax or rental fee. In fact, I think some churches are even saying they're buying into this wholeheartedly, saying, well, yeah, we're on traditional land, so we should be paying up an extra tax and giving that money to the local First Nation. Is that what we're talking about here, Brian?
That is what we're talking about. And some of the most extreme claims are that the treaties in the treaty area never did cede the land to the government. That is, there were always two nations, or a number of nations, that made treaties, but they never did give up their rights. and we all just share land, and you don't the original transfer to the government was not really a transfer at all. It was just an agreement to share land. So that means that
Okay,
they can
wow.
never transfer more of a title than they receive. That's called root of title. And so these extreme arguments, unfortunately, are being are gaining ground. So I think Canadians should be. I'm not trying to be a doomsayer here, but I think that huge changes are underway in Canada, and Canadians largely are not even aware of what's happening. And I think British Columbia and the Haida Agreement is probably going to bring this home to people that, wow, there are some things happening here, and we better be paying attention.
Okay, so pay attention to this, and we need transparent, open debate more than ever, because it strikes me that this issue is very important. If there's a kind of a fuzziness, an uncertainty, a fear, if you will, about who owns your land, then how would anyone rationally, in their right mind, quite frankly, invest in anything, let alone a business? So then our basis for prosperity goes out the window, because we don't even know what's up or down when it comes to confidence and the ability to make agreements. Is that a fair comment, Brian?
Yeah, I don't think I can add to it. I think that's exactly right. When UNDRIP was being proposed for Canada and then for BC, exactly those arguments were made.
And just to clarify, what is UNDRIP, Brian? Can you help us
UNDRIP
understand
is the
what
United
UNDRIP is?
Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it basically means that collective laws or tribal laws will govern, and Indigenous people will be treated differently than other Canadians. Canada, during the, and I'm sure you're going to get to this, during the furor over the false Kamloops Graves claim, guilt over that, passed UNDRIP. So basically, UNDRIP, if you can think of my understanding of the law and yours and our various rights, those are individual rights. You and I have individual rights as Canadians. Well, now there's also these collective rights, these tribal rights. So this is a step back a couple hundred years to where Canada was before it even became a country.
So you're saying that there's this United Nations declaration for essentially group rights, that our own federal government signed on to this international agreement that basically says that those rights will supersede our own. Is that what you're saying?
That's what it is. The original intention of UNDRIP was to protect Indigenous groups in countries, in third world countries, where they were being persecuted. That was the idea. But activists have managed to persuade our people in our parliament that it made sense to pass that regressive legislation in Canada and British Columbia. And I'm saying that's going to make things a lot worse than they otherwise would have been.
So, as we look at these kinds of issues, I mean, obviously, the whole idea that we are equal before the law and that there are no second-class citizens in Canada, why is that so important for Canadians in your mind? Why does this really matter?
Well, that's what Canada is supposed to be all about. Everybody has equal status. Everybody has an equal chance to succeed. We have always believed that we should help the disadvantaged, and I absolutely agree with that. And I agree that there are far too many Indigenous people in that disadvantaged category. We have to help them get out of that spot.
Indeed.
But I absolutely firmly believe that in order for this country to succeed, we all have to be equal citizens. We cannot be treated as members of a tribe or a racial group or whatever. We're all at liberty to celebrate our diversity in any way we want, but equal treatment under the law and equal citizenship status is the only way that this country can be successful.
Well, I certainly appreciate your vision, Brian Giesbrecht. We're so glad that you could join us for this discussion. as we talk about how we succeed as a nation and how it's important that we are all equal under the law. So thank you for joining us today.
Okay, very welcome, David.
Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.